Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next session for International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. And I'm delighted to be joined by Zoe, Rose, and Chris Grundemann. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, perfect.
And they're the founders of the Imposter Syndrome Network Podcast. So, Chris, I don't know if you would like to do a quick introduction to yourself, and then I'll come to you, Zoe.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a network engineer by trade and an entrepreneur these days. And definitely have struggled with imposter syndrome through my career, which we'll, I think, talk about quite a bit. And yeah, that's me. You can find more at chrisgrundemann.com if you like.
And Zoe.
Yeah, I don't have a very exciting intro. I'm Zoe. I work in security. Right now, I'm a regional information security team lead for the EMEA region. And you can follow me or check out my blog at rosesec.com.
Please, thank you. To start off with, can you tell us perhaps a little bit more about yourselves and your backgrounds and how, I guess, you've struggled with imposter syndrome in your careers and in your life to date? Chris, if I come to you first on this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, at least for me, I've found that imposter syndrome or feelings of being an imposter or being not smart enough or not knowing enough or not good enough have, plagued my entire career. Definitely early on, to the point where somebody would ask me a question about the network, I might even maybe not quite lie, but get pretty dang close, maybe closer than I should have, because I just wanted to be seen as someone who knew what I was doing, and really felt like I never quite knew enough. And luckily, as my career has progressed, I've realized how common that is. I think it's common, obviously, beyond just technology careers, but that's been my focus and my path. And this, ability to be able to, say you don't know, to understand that there is no way you can ever know everything, has really helped a lot. And there's some other techniques and stuff I think we'll talk about, but definitely, coming up through the ranks as a self-taught network engineer, this has been something that I've dealt with on a pretty much daily basis for almost 20 years now.
Okay. And yourself, Zoe?
Yeah, I've worked in technology for more than 10 years, not quite as long as Chris, but getting up there. And I don't know how, but somehow I've convinced people that I'm a security expert. But I didn't actually start out that way. So I suppose when I started, I was non-technical and I learnt on the job, just like Chris. I also at one point owned an MSP, or was entrepreneur, I guess, when I was in Canada. And then I moved into offensive security in the UK. And then I moved back into defensive security, which I personally think I fit better in. And one thing about security is you have to have all the answers, it feels like. And it's literally impossible. It is a massive, massive career. So you can't have all the answers. And so there was many times, just like Chris, where people would ask me a question, I'd be like, I have no idea. But I can't say that, right? I mean, I'm a woman in industry. And sometimes if you admit you don't know something, you are often looked over as if, wow, you're an idiot because you don't know this exact answer. And so it took me a very long time to acknowledge that I cannot know something, and that's still okay. I think offensive security I found quite challenging because I always felt like people were questioning me because I was a woman. Maybe that was my perception, maybe it's not the case, but I realized that if I changed the title from ethical hacker to cyber investigator, I was treated better. And that actually changed my own perception of my success. And so when I moved into defensive security, so, the blue teaming side, I looked at job titles as, maybe this can actually affect my confidence. So I'm actually quite critical about, I know I don't really, on one side, I don't really care about job titles for other people, but on the other side, it does actually set the tone when you're meeting someone. So for some people, it really, really helps. So that's actually, weirdly enough, one key thing to keeping my confidence a little bit higher, I suppose.
I can resonate with a lot of that, Zoe, being in cybersecurity myself, and that whole perception thing of, is it because I'm a woman, or, you know, do I know as much, etc. I can really get with that. So
I should acknowledge that
yeah,
when I was really struggling, I didn't have the team behind me to support me. Whereas at my current role, it literally doesn't matter who I am, you know, my gender, my ethnical background, my location, anything. I just have a really strong team. So I think building or having the right community around you also is really important.
Yeah, so true, Zoe. I'll come to both of you on this. So how did the idea for the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast come about, and what made you decide to launch it?
It's actually, this is actually Chris's credit, I will say.
Okay.
Are you okay?
Sorry about that. My audio went out for a little bit. I don't know, Zoe, were you answering, or should I jump in here?
I was just saying it's credit to you. You thought of it.
All right. I couldn't hear anything for a minute, but yeah, and it's one of those things that's been rolling around in my mind for quite a while. Like some other folks in IT and the work around technology, I kind of collect domain names from time to time. And after kind of being exposed, and really it was, a lot of credit goes to Stephen Foskett, actually, and the Gestalt IT team and Tom Hollingsworth and that whole family and the community that they've built around them. Because when I got drawn into that and started going to the Tech Field Day events and meeting these other people who were doing blogging and podcasting, and, you know, other kind of people who were influencers in the industry and thought luminaries and all of those things, and was able to kind of sit down at dinner with those folks and talk to them and realize that they had these same doubts and insecurities that I had, or these people that I looked up to and had listened to or read for years had the same feelings of do I really know what I'm doing? Is this really the right answer? And so I thought of this idea of imposter syndrome and registered the domains. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it yet, but I knew there was something there, that imposter syndrome in technology was a specific or special case. And I also kind of, on the other side, wanted to start a podcast, because I think, you know, that's kind of been the evolution of blogging and kind of the way that information sharing has gone, is more video, but also more audio and different ways to consume content. And so those two things came together when Zoe and I were at a Security Field Day event, actually. And Zoe mentioned that she wanted to start a podcast or be involved in a podcast. And for whatever reason, in that moment, it just kind of all clicked in place. And I was like, you know what, let's just do this. Let's take the imposter syndrome idea. Let's take the podcast idea. Let's put them together and let's start, you know, maybe, you know, the downside was, you know, yet another technology podcast. But I think the upside is, you know, the way we're approaching it is in this very human aspect of looking at not the technology, but the people that make this technology work, right? And so I think that's what's really important. And that's what's kind of turned out of it, is I really do think that, you know, digital infrastructure underlays all of our lives, whether we work in technology or not. These things that all of these folks build are really a big part of modern civilization. And so to be able to support those people, one, that are actively doing this job, but then also highlight those jobs and those different career paths, as well as the fact that everyone kind of feels this way, I'm hoping will inspire kind of the next generation of folks to come into this. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of kids, you know, when they hear of technology, they think of one specific thing. A lot of people think of, you know, like software developers, maybe is a technology, or maybe it's just robotics, or like there's this one specific thing. And I think by telling these stories, we're able to show that there's all these roles available, all these different paths, all these different journeys that are available within technology, that I think is really important. Because, you know, even for myself, I didn't even know that I worked in technology for a long time. Like, that was weird, right? I was a network engineer for a long time, and someone said, oh, you work in tech. And that kind of took me aback. And I was like, oh, I get, like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess, but it really wasn't something I didn't think of it that way. And so I think that's true in both sides. And so hopefully we can show these stories that, like I said, people who are working in tech today can know that they're not alone with these feelings. Hopefully we can show some faces and some voices that people can resonate with, right? Different backgrounds and different cultures, and that people from all over the world and all kinds of backgrounds and whatever your story may be can work in technology, and showing that, I think, is helpful as well. as well as the plethora of jobs that are available.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. And when I saw it, I was really excited about the prospect of a podcast that was going to be dedicated to imposter syndrome, especially since myself and my two co-founders got this day off the ground a couple of years ago, to really open up those conversations around imposter syndrome. And as you rightly said, Chris, helping them feel that they're not alone with those feelings that they're having. So what would you say has been the response so far to the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast, and what kind of feedback and stuff are you getting from it?
Yeah, it's been really good. It's like, I'll be honest, when I do stuff, I'm always kind of surprised people listen to me. So I was a little bit shocked, but actually, it's been actually really brilliant. I've had people reach out to me and say, they love learning the reason other people took different career paths or different journeys, which, it doesn't sound like that's a big thing, but as Chris said, like, there's so many different journeys you could take and so many different careers you can have that actually is really cool. And then also other people saying, it showed them that maybe they could actually do that. And that actually basically went to the reason we started in the first place. And so for me, that's been probably the biggest achievement, is demystifying the different options out there.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
it's been really great to hear people that see the show and resonate with it. So that's awesome.
And people watch it and listen. Well, not watch, listen. It's like, I think we're at over 5,000 downloads now, which again, like, people are listening to me. I don't know why. I think maybe that's Chris.
I mean, certainly I've been sharing it on the Imposter Syndrome Network pages that we've got on social media. And I popped a link to it as well on our site under the resources, because I think it's a really valuable thing, for people to get those real life, accounts to go and listen to, and to, hopefully validate, the feelings that they've got around imposter syndrome. And you've had some absolutely fantastic guests so far on the show. Who's your favorite to date, and why?
Well, as you said, we've had, I think as of Tuesday, we have now 37 episodes live. So that's 37 absolutely fabulous individuals who have come on and been willing to tell their story. It's really, really hard to pull out one favorite. I do think, one kind of credit to Ethan Banks, who's part of the Packet Pushers podcast network and creator of that. He was our first guest, so really awesome for him to kind of take a leap and go on a podcast that, two folks he kind of knows are starting and being willing to do that. That's awesome. And then early on, right? I mean, some of the early conversations, like Ray Baker was a really great conversation that I really enjoyed. Lisa Forte is an amazing woman and really did a good job of kind of showcasing her perspective on life, which was really, really refreshing and awesome. Dave Temkin also, I think, was willing to kind of share some things a little bit behind the scenes. And I will say that some of the episodes that really stand out to me are the ones where we go off the beaten track a little bit. So we had Stephanie Gorlick on, who's actually a sex therapist who also does, counseling around relationships. And so she calls herself tech adjacent. She doesn't work in tech, but has some really good input for how people can communicate at work and build those relationships and things, which, again, to Zoe's point, having that team around you, I think, is what really helps with imposter syndrome. Michelin Murphy's another one that's really, really interesting. She's on her kind of third act in life, right? She's on her third career. She was, I forget what she did first, but then she was a lawyer and did kind of a whole career as a lawyer and now moved into network engineering. Anyway, just, the list goes on and on. It's been really amazing. I don't know, Zoe, which ones stand out for you?
Oh my goodness. I could not say this is my absolute favorite, because as Chris said, we have had some really excellent guests. They are brilliant in their industry and truly helpful. Like, I have learned so much from just the episodes that we've recorded already. Maybe some of my favorite quotes or maybe favorite advice. I did also bring up Lisa Forte, is her comment on not being afraid to fail. That was really, really impactful for me, because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, which is not the most effective when you're trying to grow and learn. Mistakes are part of that, and failure is part of that. So I think it's really good to hear from somebody else that you look up to. I mean, she's absolutely brilliant and I love her.
She is.
But it's awesome for her to tell me it's okay to fail, Zoe. Like, that was really helpful. Another one was Wolfgang, who actually Stephanie and Wolf, I'm actually bringing both of them up, but they're married. So Wolf was not being afraid, or sometimes being afraid, and actually even some imposter syndrome isn't actually a bad thing. It can help motivate you and help you grow and go further. Stephanie's, just as Chris mentioned, over explaining sometimes, or being extremely clear, was really good advice for me, because I'm not the best at communication, and sometimes I assume that people think in the same way that my mind works, because that makes sense. Even though I've been told many times that I'm very odd, I still think people think the same way as me. So sometimes being told that, so we know, be more clear, that was really helpful. Yvonne, I loved her advice about the fear of missing out. It's always going to exist, but remembering that the path you chose at that time, that was the right decision at the time. And so not feeling that sense of, I messed up, or I made a mistake. Actually saying, I made that choice at the time and it was the right choice. I can make a different choice in the future, but that doesn't mean that it's ended. I can still grow from here. Another one was Marina saying, when you're nervous, think back. How far have you come? How much have you grown? And then Michelin is another one I was going to bring up, was having that right community and the right team is vital, because your work environment, if you can't admit you're wrong or you don't know, then maybe it's not the right environment. Maybe it's not actually encouraging you to grow, because you can't say, I don't know. Whereas she is in a position where she can say, I don't have the answer, but I know who to talk to. And she's still respected, and that's a really important part of growing and going further in your industry.
Absolutely. What plans have you got coming up? So who have you got coming up next on the Imposter Syndrome Network, and what are you most looking forward to?
One of the ones I'm most excited about is we've actually locked in a recording with Vint Cerf, which, I don't know if folks know too much about the history of the internet, but Vint was one of the people who was there at the very beginning and kind of invented the whole TCP/IP protocol, along with several others. But he's one of the only ones who's still around and still engaged and involved in the industry. So I think that's going to be an amazing conversation. He's a really, really smart person and really insightful. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that one's going to be really cool. I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty excited about that one as well. We've actually recorded one that I'm excited about as well. It's just not live yet, with Peter Jones. He's a really lovely person that has given me a ton of advice personally as well. So I'm just really excited for that one to go live and just celebrate, because he's just such a genuinely nice person with actually really good advice as well.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to those coming up. They sound really, really exciting. What plans do you have for the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast moving forward? How would you like to see it grow and develop?
I mean, our main goal right now is to essentially grow the podcast, right? Grow the audience. I think the more people who hear these stories, the more people who are going to be inspired and helped. We've heard some of the feedback we got was that, it's kind of like kind of like therapy. That going through these things and talking through these things and understanding that other people are going through them. And then again, there's that inspirational part where we want to inspire people to come into technology and to work in technology and the different areas of technology. And so in order for those two things to happen on the biggest scale, we just need to reach more people. So I don't know how we're going to do it, but definitely kind of continuing to do it, continuing to bring on new great guests, and ensuring that we can make it as easy as possible for folks to find the podcast and listen. And also, the LinkedIn community, I'm hoping that'll grow and continue to evolve. And so that's available too, if folks want to kind of find that, the Imposter Syndrome Network. There is a group on LinkedIn you can join and kind of talk about these topics in between the episodes, which I'm hoping will grow as well, and hopefully, have some good conversations there.
Yeah, and I think another bit is whilst I'm absolutely enjoying interviewing people and hearing their brilliant advice and stories, the other thought I had was, and Chris, we've already chatted about it, so it's also his idea, is maybe having some panels and maybe discussions around different career levels. Like, why not talk to people that are breaking into industry? Maybe people that just went through an internship, for example, or thoughts that they've had, or things that they learned, or persons that are more in an intermediate stage in their career, or, also people in a much more senior area of their career, and what advice they had. Because I think one thing that's really key to me is your career is only one part of your life, right? But your personal life also affects your professional. As much as growing up, everybody said, no, personal and business are different. Don't bring your home life to work. I've realized that's really rubbish advice. I'm a mum. Sometimes my daughter sits on my lap when I'm working. It just happens. So I think what I'd really like is discussing everything that impacts your career. The personal, the professional, the training, the very weird experience that you have an obsession of this hobby, but that actually helps you with your career, maybe. So having those like not as career-y focused stuff, and how that actually affects, or maybe makes your job better and makes your life better. So yeah, that's kind of the area I'm looking at.
I can really resonate with that. So just to share from my experience of that, I don't have children, but I have a dog that has a rare pancreatic illness, and she needs food with medicine 4 times a day. And 3 times a day, I have to stop to give her the food with the medicine because it keeps the condition at bay. And so I have to be mindful about, don't do a call at this time, or don't that, or sometimes she'll come running to me and start barking because it's my food time. Yeah. So I know it's not the same kind of thing, but it's similar,
it takes scheduling, and I am not as organized as that, so I would probably be rubbish. But no, it impacts your day, and you have to schedule around it. So it's important to be aware of different people's needs. And I think right now organizations are realizing they have to be more flexible to keep and maintain the talent that they want at that skill level.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Do you think that imposter syndrome is perhaps more prevalent in the digital infrastructure industry compared to, say, other industries from your experience?
When I started, I worked at an accounting firm, and I may or may not have been listening in on another conversation. I was, 18 years old, I think, at the time. I was quite young. And there was this guy, this accountant who I look up to, speaking to this young lady who is, I think, more intermediate in her career. And I remember him talking to her about job titles, and because she was struggling with her confidence as an accountant. And I remember being fascinated because I was like, she's struggling? Like, how could she be struggling? She's so smart. So I think the moral of the story is, from my perspective, I don't think it only exists, or it's more prevalent specifically in security, or you said infosec, I think, but maybe just technology. I think any career that requires you to troubleshoot things, deal with people, think outside of the default, it's not just a checkbox thing. And anything that's constantly changing, you're going to introduce insecurities. If it's a big career and you can't know everything, you're going to be insecure in some stage. So I think it's common in our industry because it's big and it's challenging and it's constantly changing, but I don't think it's limited to us. I also think, as a mum, I have imposter syndrome like all the time. I am convinced I'm a rubbish mother. I think it's just a human thing. So I think the key part is just dealing with it and understanding how can you move forward, and where are you going to benefit from being afraid because maybe it motivates you to try harder, and where is it too much and you need to rely on your community and maybe go through a little bit of, as Chris said, listen to the podcast, and maybe it's like a therapy.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It definitely impacts other areas of my life as well. I do think that, knowledge work in particular, and especially, really technical knowledge work, and technical in this time could be not just technology, but I think lawyers, doctors, accountants, as Zoe pointed out, anywhere where there's knowledge work and you can kind of learn more and more. I think of the Dunning-Kruger effect and this idea that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's where a lot of imposter syndrome comes from these days, is that we've dug deep into these kind of niche areas. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And so, I'm somebody who has 8 patents and I've written 2 books and I've given talks in 34 cities on 5 continents. And I don't know that I know anything about what I'm doing. And part of that's because I have learned more, and that's what's wild about this, is that as you open your horizons and become more successful, imposter syndrome actually potentially gets worse. And so that's one of the things I think is really, really interesting about how it impacts the technology industry, but as Zoe said, all of us.
Brilliant, thank you both. Can you share your own experiences? I know, Zoe, you touched a little bit on the whole imposter syndrome piece around being a mum, but perhaps sharing your individual experiences on imposter syndrome from your own perspective, and perhaps how you manage that and how you manage those thoughts.
Yeah, I think coming from a non-technical background and then moving into technology through the earlier part of my career, it was really hard because a lot of things I didn't know the foundations. And so I would feel often somebody would ask me something and I'd be like, I have no idea even how to approach that. But the way I dealt with it was a lot of research, a lot of investigating, a lot of YouTube videos, and understanding the foundations, because I might not know this exact answer, but I do understand how it works and how it functions at the base. And so I can grow from there, So that's kind of how I approached it in the beginning part of my career. I didn't take the best approach sometimes, where I overworked and got overwhelmed and didn't necessarily sleep. And so that wasn't as effective. And my lessons learned was sleep is very important for confidence, because if you're too tired to process something, you're just going to be stuck in this loop of frustration. So another part is, sleep. Now in my career, I think the most important part for me is having the right community. I mentioned earlier my team. I had situations in the past where if I didn't know the answer, I was then judged as if I was an idiot because I didn't know this one specific unique request. Now, the other day I couldn't answer something that was very foundational. It was actually quite embarrassing, but my brain was just not there. And I was like, can you answer this for me? Because I can't answer it at this moment. And one of my colleagues was like, yeah, sure. And they went and they answered it. And they've never treated me any differently since then. It was fully, they respect me, I respect them. And it was just collaborative and really beneficial. Also, again, throughout my career, I've always been a part of certain communities, like the Imposter Syndrome Network is a great community. I'm a bit biased, but it's a great community to meet other people and chat about other problems. But other things I've done is been a part of the hacker community when I was growing up in Canada, when I moved to the UK, joining those communities as well, because you can't know everything, but you can know the right person to talk to. And it puts the context in place where, you speak to them and they can explain it in a way that you understand. And then it's great, So my answer usually is, I don't know, but I know who to talk to, or I don't know, but I know how to find out. And I think that's been key, because it's a next step. I'm not stuck. I don't know, it's not that I don't know and I can't figure out. It's, I know what the next step is. Even if it's not directly I know who to talk to. So I think that's really important. And as Chris already brought up, the Tech Field Day community is also really brilliant, because these are people that know a ton of stuff, that are super impressive, but they're also really nice. And then also I'm also a part of this Cisco Champion program. So again, these are just communities where I can reach out to people and they can talk to me in a way that I understand, and sometimes help me by reminding me that I've come a pretty far way. Looking back at my career, I've grown a bit over the last 14 years-ish. So those are always really good reminders. Chris?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, very similar, right? I think from the very early days in my career, maybe even way before that, right? I think for me, and maybe it's something built into me, but as Zoe said, I think it's a very common human experience. But I remember even as a kid, and one of the things my parents did for me that was really good is they told me I was smart. And whether they were right or wrong, I don't know, but they definitely influenced me to think I was enough to like pursue school and pursue, technical topics and that kind of stuff. So it worked, whether they were right or not. It kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think. But the downside of it was, they were constantly telling me how smart I was. And so I looked kind of for external validation of that. And it was hard to find. And I actually ended up finding the opposite through my curiosity, right? And I remember the first time I saw an article about some kid who was, I forget if it was 12 or 14 years old. We could probably go back to the history books and look at it in the 80s or 90s. Some kid who was 12 or 14 years old got admitted to Harvard, right? And I remember seeing that and I was like, oh man, I'm not even close to getting admitted to Harvard. I'm definitely not smart. Like this is and this is where the bar, I set the bar, right? And I remember I think I've read that, Alexander the Great had taken over, most of Europe by the time he was 22. And I was like, man, I'm not on track to rule the world by 22. I definitely am failing here. And I mean, this was literally legitimately how I felt. And that definitely carried through into work where I think at times I would even be really defensive about things, right? Because I didn't want folks to know that I didn't know what I was doing. Which of course this was silly because I was early in my career. I was first couple of years in. Of course I had no idea what I was doing. But if somebody asked me a question, right, I'd get defensive. Maybe I might even lash out. And part of it was I didn't have anyone to ask for help. Luckily I did find resources and things, and it's a little bit different world now. Luckily, I think a lot of folks coming up through technology ranks today have YouTube, maybe even influencers on TikTok. I mean, there's a lot of places now where you can go for this kind of information. When I was learning how to do network engineering, there wasn't even, Twitter or anything, right? I mean, you could search around on the web, but kind of good luck, right? And that definitely had an influence on me. And luckily I had a boss really, really early on, one of my first bosses, who kind of sat me down at one point and said, Chris, I have this problem with all engineers. If I ask you a question, don't make something up. If you don't know, tell me you don't know, and then go find the answer and come back and tell me the answer. Don't just pull something out of the air. Don't tell me it's the flux capacitor, right? Tell me you don't know and go find out. And that was really, really, really helpful for me. He also taught me another lesson that was not necessarily related to imposter syndrome, but just this idea that when I told him I didn't have time, he'd always kind of yell at me and say, well, you have the same 24 hours every day. So it's not that you didn't have time, it's that you didn't make time, which I think is an interesting one to remember as well. But that idea that, admitting that you don't know something is the first step to growth, right? And not to go too far off on a tangent here, but I mean, that's also the basis of kind of science, right? Which is really interesting, is that, the only way to learn as an individual or as a culture or as a society is to admit that you don't know. That's base level, but it's really, really hard. And I've struggled with that. And I think that the thing that's helped me the most, to be honest, is also really hard, which is just experience, right? Just through experience, I've gained confidence. I've talked to enough people. I've learned enough things that now I know that, it's impossible to know everything. And I'm pretty cool, right? And one thing that I've done is, was recommended by somebody, and has actually come up on the podcast as well, is this idea of kind of keeping a little not logbook, but scrapbook of your own achievements that you can kind of look back over every now and then to kind of reinforce that you've done some things and some things. And reviewing that stuff, I think, is important as well. But anyway, yeah, it's been kind of constant, and up until today, right? And I mean, now my career has evolved and changed through different jobs, and that's been another tough part, which is this move from a technical role into a more managerial role, or into a sales engineer type role, or into a more technical marketing role. And all these times, you're getting maybe further away from the very deep technology that you tied your identity around. And so in a lot of ways, I am less smart than I was, maybe 5 years ago when I was on the CLI every day. And that's hard to deal with too. So I think there's lots of struggles in this as far as finding your path and understanding where you fit, right? And to Zoe's point earlier, right, I really do think that surrounding yourself with the right people is a huge part of this. Knowing someone that you can ask who's going to know the answer, or having a team of people, having a community around you where you can go ask for answers, and either one, get an answer back, or two, learn that this problem really is really tough and no one has an answer. Either one of those things is very, very helpful.
That's so true. And again, from my experience, I transitioned into tech and cybersecurity way back in 2009. Prior to that, I'd spent years working in the entertainment industry, believe it or not, and transitioned through my ex-husband, who was very high up as an ethical hacker in cybersecurity. And prior to that, I worked with Chris Tarrant of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire fame. And so that whole imposter syndrome thing of transitioning from that into cyber, of I've got no business being in tech, or all I know is all the studio stuff and the recordings and TX and RX and stuff. I don't know anything about cyber. What am I doing here? So that level of imposter syndrome was really high back then. And like you said, around surrounding yourself with the right people, I was very, very fortunate to link up with Dr. Emma Philpott, who now runs the IASME scheme, very close by to me in my local area. And she's always been a huge support, somebody I've always been able to go to, and a massive mentor throughout my career. So certainly surrounding yourselves with the right people and getting those mentors and people on board, I think is absolutely critical. Just as we wrap up, I think a final word from you both. So say nobody's heard anything that we've said in the last sort of 40 minutes or so. What's the one piece of advice that you would give everyone listening today, and your kind of final word on what we're talking about?
So going along with what I was just saying, I think a big thing that we haven't really addressed directly yet is not comparing yourself to others. Right. And it's hard to do. You're going to slip. You're going to always kind of do this external validation and comparison thing. But the more you can compete with yourself and just try to have a better day today than you had yesterday, do a slightly better job, on this project than you did on the last one, admitting that you're learning as you go and striving for continual improvement, again, competing with yourself and not really worrying about the rest. I think that's super, super helpful. And I think if I could leave people with one thing, it's that, right? Compete with yourself, not others.
That's a really good point. I think my advice would be look at the environment you're in. So we talked a lot about what you can do, what you can focus on, but we didn't highlight what about external parties, external influences. Sometimes you're just in the wrong situation. It might be looking critically at your current role. Does that job bring you joy? Is your manager supporting you appropriately? Because a manager is really important. A lot of people say, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And actually, that's really true. Do you have the required skills for your job? Maybe you're struggling because they haven't supported you and you need more training. There's nothing wrong with taking training. Some people learn hands-on, some people learn by reading books, some people learn by watching YouTube. Do what works for you. All of those things can affect your confidence. Some of them you can kind of change, some of them you're not going to be able to change. You can't force your manager to be a good manager. You can try and manage upwards slightly, but it might not change. The company might not be the right company. The job might not be the right job. I mean, look at what things you've done in the past that you liked and what you're good at. Is that what you're doing right now? So I think my advice to look at your situation is consider, is it you that needs to change, or is it actually something realistically you can't change and therefore you might need to move? It might be a job, it might be a home situation, it might be something else, but consider the environment you're working in, the environment you're living in, and think, is this something that is encouraging me to grow, or is this something that I need to change?
Brilliant advice, Zoe and Chris. Thank you. Thank you both so much for joining me for this Q&A session today. And thank you both so much for the great work that you're doing on the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast. Looking forward to seeing a lot of the future guests that you have and following the development of it. And thank you both again for being with me today. We've got another event coming up at 5 o'clock where we have Dr. Melissa Sassy and her daughter Zara talking about managing imposter syndrome, a family's journey to overcoming and thriving. And that's with Nat Schooler, who's another of the co-founders of International Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day. Thank you again, Zoe and Chris, for being here today. And everyone keep the conversation going. Head over to our social media channels and also have a look at the Imposter Syndrome Network and check out all the great episodes that are on there. And we'll see you back at 5 o'clock for our next event. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.